sorry, I was interrupted. In Israel you have the chief rabbinate, which is a government organization. A lot of people think they're ultra-Orthodox because the rabbis have to wear black hats and frocks and so forth as their uniform, but it's not really an ultra-Orthodox entity. It's really a modern Orthodox entity, but it has taken more of a turn to right-wing modern Orthodoxy, but it's still essentially religious Zionist modern Orthodox. It's not, ultra-Orthodox, despite even, the way they dress and so forth. I mean, that's just the law in Israel. That, even Rabbi Riskin, I think, wears a Hamburg and a Bekisher, just because that's the law. I've never seen pictures of him on Shabbos, but or Motzei Shabbos or anything in his Shabbos clothes. But I'd like to see a picture of that. It would be interesting. But the law is that you have to wear a particular uniform as the chief rabbi, and so he's the chief rabbi of his town of Efrat. So therefore, that's why he wears that. So anyway. And obviously he's from more the left wing of modern Orthodoxy, but the point that I wanted to say was that there are two states of Israel, because and the fact of the matter is that the ultra-Orthodox are also just as excluded from the Rabbanut as the Reform and Conservative are. There's really not much difference, except for the fact that the ultra-Orthodox are allowed to register their own marriages outside of the structure of the Rabbanut. They have the freedom to do so, which really the Reform and Conservatives should be allowed to do as well. Given that freedom, in my opinion, or at least they should have the freedom to, at the very least, in Israel, have prove two people to be married and then allow a Reform or Conservative rabbi to officiate at the ceremony. That for sure they should allow, because that's not any issue of mamzerus or anything like that. As long as the Rabbanut allows these two people to be married, there's absolutely no reason to say that the stories I heard, a rabbi from America, Reform a Conservative rabbi, and he wants to officiate at his own child's wedding. He's not allowed to legally, there's no reason for that. That's ridiculous. It's just this status quo and so forth. But the point is that, so why did the Reform and Conservative have this support for the state of Israel, have this idea that meaning a synagogue would put the synagogue whose values are not respected by the state of Israel, mostly because of democratic reasons, meaning that the average Chiloni doesn't care about whether or not women could read the Torah at the Western Wall. Who cares, And the average Masorti doesn't want it. And those who want it are a small minority. If democratically there could be changes, perhaps, but the fact of the matter is that the diaspora, Judaism and Jewish community doesn't have that influence because they're not citizens, And it really doesn't matter. I really don't. I mean, to me, I'm not a Zionist, so it doesn't bother me. But it seems so silly to me that the Reform and Conservative live in a dream world where they think that the state of Israel is something that is somehow, they have a bias on, that's a hefza that they have some connection to, when it really isn't. It's really, unless you go and move there and you're a citizen, you have nothing to do with it. And people should be honest about what it is. And so what I suggest is that the state of Israel that these people believe in is an imaginary fantasy that doesn't exist. It's quite similar to the state of Israel that Christian Zionists imagine exists. That doesn't really exist. where they think somehow this is the biblical restoration, which of course it isn't. Everybody knows it isn't. Like Mar Shiva said, he was teaching us about the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, the holiness of the Holy Land, and he said, we have to have utmost respect for the land because of its holy quality. And he said he remembers he was on an airplane, and there was a pastor speaking to his congregation, bringing them on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land and explaining to them the holiness and how the land is holy and the people are holy. And then Shiva said, "Oy vey, I hope he doesn't wind up in Tel Aviv and see what really goes on in Israel. And the holiness is just a bluff. I mean, if anything, it's an insult to the holiness what goes on there, because yes, the land is holy. In Judaism, really, it's a halachic description, holiness. People get confused. What is the holiness of Eretz Yisrael? The Mishnah is very clear. It says the holiness of Eretz Yisrael is very simply that there are certain laws that apply there that don't apply in other countries, and that's in other lands, and that's even part of the modern state of Israel is not Eretz Yisrael, and there are parts of other countries that are Eretz Yisrael. It's neither here nor there. But the point is, for example, the agricultural laws, the sabbatical and so forth, that don't apply in other lands, they apply there, and that's what the holiness of Eretz Yisrael is. It's not this mystical, magical thing so much, except there are certain inyanim, perhaps that Nevuah was only perhaps in Eretz Yisrael, many say, although that we have kashas on how did Yecheskel receive Nevuah, how did Ezekiel receive prophecy, and even what was the status of Daniel. We don't consider him to be a prophet. Christians do, and we consider him to be someone who is inspired by Holy Spirit, but not a prophet. And what's the ramifications of that, and so forth. I mean, again, that's neither here nor there. But the point I'm saying, and the same thing, that the haters of the state of Israel also have this imaginary view of the state of Israel. It's not that as bad as most people who hate the state of Israel imagine it to be. It's a country like any other country. It happens to be in the Holy Land, and there happens to be a Jewish majority. It happens to be the only country that has a Jewish majority, and it happens to be that certain aspects of Jewish law are incorporated into the civil laws, particularly when it comes to marriage and divorce and burial for Jewish people. Other than that, it's not much different than any other country. It's a country just like any other country. They happen to be very successful in a lot of things in technology and so forth. But it's not this fantasy that people have about it. The fantasy that people have about the state of Israel. And so, yes, there is more than one state of Israel. There's the real state of Israel that exists as a country in what Jews and Christians call the Holy Land, for the most part, as far as the geography of it. And it was holy when it was under Turkish rule. It was holy when it was under the British Mandate. It was holy all these times. It's still holy. There's no change in the holiness of the Holy Land by virtue of the fact that the state of Israel occupies it now, or whoever's occupying it at the time. When Mashiach comes, it's going to be a totally different system. But that's neither here nor there. The point is the state of Israel that people imagine is just not real. It doesn't exist. There's a real country that's real, and it is a fantasy that people imagine. A lot of people who live there are also living in a fantasy world. Does it exist on some other dimensional plane? Yeah, it exists in people's minds, and that's something that's real. It's not something that exists in Olam Ha'asiyah. It's not something that exists in this world that we interact with politically and so forth. It's just not real. And people should stop fantasizing about this fake state of Israel that doesn't exist and romanticizing the state of Israel that doesn't exist. Doesn't mean you have to oppose it. I personally oppose the idea of a Jewish state, but I don't oppose the state of Israel if it would in other aspects of it. Meaning, for example, for the most part, they're even though we can say theologically that their fights with other nations are due to their sins, still, and if these nations weren't there, God would send other nations. That's on a theological level, but on a political level, they are a valuable ally to the, for example, the country that I'm a citizen of, the United States. The state of Israel is that is true. That's not a fantasy. And that's why it's worthwhile to but what does it mean to support Israel? Like, there are certain people who think it's like some kind of a ethereal, spiritual, religious thing. I support Israel, It's silly. It's not common sense. But if you want to say, well, who are you rooting for in the fights between when they have wars? You root for Israel because they're at the very least the lesser of two evils here. That's for sure. I don't think anyone can deny that. I know there are people who try to, but it's ridiculous. Obviously, Israel's the lesser of two evils in this situation, and everything else is propaganda. And in certain cases, they're not evil at all. This whole story now with the metal detectors. Are you serious? I mean, what? You need to go through a metal detector to go to the Western Wall. Why can't you go through a metal detector to go to the Temple Mount? I mean, who cares? What? Seriously? I mean, it's ridiculous. I don't know. All right. And that also proves that there's this fantasy about the state of Israel. It's just not real. So people got to be more realistic when dealing with these things. I know it's fun to be romantic and fun to be poetic and fun to have this imagined spirituality, but when it's detrimental, I mean, it's just silly. You're going to say, or when it's just nonsensical. The synagogue. I mean, you're an egalitarian synagogue, and so you demand that the rabbi support a state that opposes what you do. Meaning, for the most part, the state of Israel says, in their ideal, you want to be secular, be secular. You want to be religious, you want to be religious. But these in-between things just go above their heads. It just doesn't make sense. The average Israeli Reform conservative Judaism, the average Israeli says the synagogue I don't go to is the Orthodox synagogue, but that's the real synagogue in most Israelis' minds. Yeah, things are changing. There are more influences from the West and so forth, but for the most part, there isn't this big popular support for Women of the Wall and so forth. There aren't thousands of Reform conservative Jews packing Reform and conservative temples in Israel the way it is in America. And the thing is, they're really not packing the temples here either, to be honest. Except Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, most of these places are empty. Unless someone's having a bar mitzvah, be honest, nothing much is going on in these places. They just have a lot of money because they have a lot of members who pay their dues, and they show up and that's what's really going on, as opposed to Orthodox shuls that are vibrant all year round, every day, every week, every holiday. That's the truth. It's the same thing with the churches. The evangelical churches are packed every Sunday, whereas the mainstream churches are packed Christmas and Easter. And the rest of the year, they're lucky if they get a minyan. I'm exaggerating, making a little joke, but that's the truth. All right. Well, God bless. Thank you for watching. Subscribe. And comment. Let's see what you guys got to say about this. Because to me, I'm not saying this to be negative. Just saying this to be realistic. But there are two Israels, you know, the one and the imaginary one, and let's stop fooling ourselves. I think if you want to fool yourself, go ahead, fool yourself. But at least be intellectually honest about what you're doing. All right. Thanks for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Be well.